Hello, musicians. Welcome to another episode of Explore Great Music with Ted. In this video, we'll do a deep dive into the score of the first movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony. We'll identify sections of its sonata form, including the key relationships between and within them. We'll hear that in the introduction and transition, Dvorak foreshadows themes that will appear later. We'll notice that Dvorak gives a prominent role to the second flutist, including a brief but important solo on the piccolo. Most importantly, we'll become familiar with themes that play a role not just within this movement, but the rest of the symphony as well. So with that, let's explore the score. There's a lot going on right here from the beginning of the introduction. The cellos have the melody, which is in the natural minor, descending by diatonic thirds, ending on a plagal cadence in E minor. Notice that underneath, the violas have a descending chromatic line that is finished by the second bassoon. This is immediately followed by an announcement by the third and fourth horns. We'll see shortly that this is a foreshadowing of the thunderclaps to come. The winds follow with a restatement of the theme previously in the low strings. Again, it descends by thirds, but it moves towards G major, ending on a half cadence. On the next page, we launch into section 2 of the introduction, with thunderclaps in the timpani and echoes in the winds and horns. This gives way to a syncopated figure in the flutes and oboes over a 5/9 of E flat. Then on the next page, the violas and cellos, doubled by the third and fourth horns, foreshadow the first theme of the primary section of the exposition. This is repeated, followed by chords in the whole orchestra. These chords lead up to a German augmented sixth chord in E minor and a traditional resolution of 1-6-4-5-1. The double bar marks the beginning of the exposition, starting with its primary section. The main theme, P1, consists of two phrases, A in the third and fourth horns and B in the clarinets and bassoons. P1 is immediately repeated with A in the oboes, then B in the winds. Note how this turn towards G major recalls the beginning of the introduction. The strings launch into a variant of P1A on the dominant of E minor, and after a lengthy build-up over 2-6-5, we reach a forceful 5-1 cadence in E minor, where several instruments in the lower register combine for a final restatement of P1A. The transition section follows immediately, drawing on material from P1B. Harmonically, it commences a modulation towards G major using a circle of fifths, but stalls on a 7 diminished seventh of G, at which point the clarinets hover over a chromatic bass line that moves away and then returns to the diminished seventh of G. Note the interjections by the violas and cellos. These are foreshadowing the first theme of the second section to come. On the arrival of the secondary section, we reach G minor, not G major, and begin on a 1-6-4 chord. The first flute and first oboe combine for the melody, and Dvorak chooses this sonority for many more solos to come. S1 repeats with a counter melody from the clarinet in the background. Next, S1 is played twice by the second violins. The A phrase of S1 is played twice by the cellos and basses, followed by interjections of the first motif of S1 in the clarinet and bassoon. Next follows a brief excursion to E major, after which the cellos and basses lead back to the dominant of G, ending on C sharp. After a statement of S1 and G major by the violins, the cellos and basses lead back again to the dominant, only this time forming an augmented sixth chord where the basses arrive on E flat. Again, The violins have S1 in G major, and this devolves until we reach a full cadence in G major. Here we've reached the second secondary section, and the first flute plays the entire S2 melody. S2 follows next in the violins, who extend it with the last D phrase, and then build up to the end of the exposition. You can see here that Dvorak has formed a stretto, with S2 starting in the trombones and low strings, which overlap 2 measures later with S2 in the upper winds and violins. The first ending takes us back to the beginning of the exposition, and the second ending will propel us to the development. In the second ending, Dvorak lingers on an augmented triad, an ambiguous sonority eventually resolved to E major, the parallel major of E minor. The development section opens with S2AB in the first horn solo, immediately followed by the same played by the piccolo. This is the only appearance of the piccolo in the entire symphony. It's also not the last time that Dvorak gives a prominent role to the second flutist. A trumpet solo on S2B is immediately followed by P1B in the oboes. As the music modulates towards A major and then A minor, S2A is played in diminution by the cellos and S2B by the oboes and second flute. Section 2 of the development section arrives on a deceptive cadence to 164, F major, with S2AB in the trumpets and S2A in diminution in the first violins and P1B in the violas and cellos. An interruption by the trombones with P1A effects a sequence up a half step to F sharp minor. With the strings continuing as before, the first and second horns enter with S2AB. Once again, the trombones play P1A, the first violins persist with S2A diminution, all over a fully diminished seventh of E, and then a fully diminished seventh of E flat. The trombones initiate section 3 of the development with P1A in E flat minor, followed by the trumpets chattering with S2A in diminution. Next, the same music is repeated up a half step, now in E minor. With another sequence a half step up, we reach F minor, where P1B is used to modulate to F sharp minor in section 4. The oboes play an articulated P1A in F sharp minor, followed by a legato P1A on the 5 of D minor. The second flute follows with a staccato P1A on the 5 of E flat minor, and then the first clarinet joins the second flute to play a legato P1A above 5 of E minor until the recapitulation arrives with P1A by the horns in E minor. The continuation with P1B, then the repeat of P1A by the oboes, mirrors the exposition. The return of P1A in the strings on the 5-9 of E minor is like the exposition, but that is followed by an unexpected pivot towards A major. The transition section begins with the strings playing P1B and perseverating on 5-4-2 of A. The key signature change to 5 sharps suggests an arrival on G sharp minor is not far off. That goal is reached when the first secondary section begins on 164, like the exposition. As we will see, the first and second secondary sections are played a half step higher than in the exposition. The second flute plays the S1 solo twice, after which it is picked up by the first flute, oboe, and bassoon. The cellos and basses start into S1A, followed by interjections of S1 in the clarinet and bassoon. As in the exposition, there is an excursion here to F major, which is the parallel major of the relative minor of the parallel enharmonic major of G sharp minor. Like the exposition, the melody in the cellos and basses lands a half step below 5 of the expected key of A flat, and then, when repeated, lands a half step above. A full cadence in A-flat major indicates the beginning of the secondary section where the second flute has the S2 solo. The continuation of S2 in the violin is like the exposition, leading up to a dramatic statement of S2A, played twice by all four horns. This launches the coda on 164 of A major, another sequence up a half step. Here there is a dialogue between the trumpets with S2AB and the trombones with P1A. With a shift to A minor, Dvorak launches a modulation towards the dominant of E minor. Note that the figure in the violins is a diminution of P1A. Section 2 of the coda begins on a deceptive cadence in E minor. The melody in the violins is P1AA followed by S2A twice, with P1AA simultaneously in diminution in the trumpets. Scale-wise ascent in the cellos and basses leads to P1A and S2A, each in diminution, to be joined by the winds with P1BA, and then two measures of frantic 1-5 alternation. The trombones and low strings announce the arrival of Section 3 with a final restatement of P1A. This is followed by a frenetic figure in the trumpets over a final cadence of 6-1 and dramatic final chords in E minor. Well, there you have it, musicians. We've studied the score of the first movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony. We've seen that it is in a sonata form that includes an introduction and coda, and where the exposition and recapitulation contain two secondary sections. We've looked at the key relationships where the exposition starts in E minor and modulates first to G minor, then G major. We also saw that in the recapitulation, these sections repeat a half step higher in G sharp minor and A flat major. We heard how Dvorak foreshadowed later themes in both the introduction and transition sections. We noticed that Dvorak gave important solos to the second flutist, including a brief piccolo solo. Finally, the presentation and development of two themes prepared us for their returns in the next three movements. As always, I'd love to hear from you, so please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments section. If you found the annotations helpful and enjoyed the commentary, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.